Today I'm going to show you how to make a fermented ginger carrot slaw. It's a probiotic rich food that makes a wonderful side dish or perfect for topping onto a salad. Hi sweet friends, I'm Mary and welcome back to Mary's Nest, where I teach traditional cooking skills for making nutrient-dense foods like bone broths, ferments, sourdough, and more. So if you enjoy learning about these things, be sure to subscribe to my channel and don't forget to click on the little notification bell below. That'll let you know every time I upload a new video. Now to make this carrot ginger slaw, we're going to need about 4 cups of carrots and we're going to want them grated. Now I'm just going to use a hand grater. Certainly if you have a food processor or something like that, you can do it in that to make it quicker. And then you're also going to want a knob of ginger. I'm just going to start with about maybe a 2-inch knob. And you can use more or less, whatever you like. I find this is a good amount so that it's not too overpowering. But if you like ginger, you could always add more. But I'm going to go ahead and start and grate these till I have about 4 cups. Well, that's about 4 cups of grated carrots, and it was 8 carrots altogether that I grated. And now I'm just going to turn my grater over to this fine side and I'm going to grate this ginger. And the reason that I want to grate this real small is so that it can blend really well through all the carrots and you don't have any sort of big chunks of ginger. Well, I've got my carrots all grated and I've got my ginger grated, and now I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of sea salt to this. And what I'm using is the coarse ground Celtic sea salt. If you're using the fine ground sea salt, you'll only use 1 tablespoon. Now, some people like to use whey, and you can certainly do that. And if you decide to use whey to make this slaw, you'll use 1 tablespoon of the coarse ground sea salt, or a half a tablespoon if it's the fine ground sea salt, and then a 1/4 cup of whey. And that's what you'll go with for your fermentation process. Now, I don't like to use whey because I find it imparts a flavor to the fermented vegetables that's different than what I would expect to something that would be similar to, old-fashioned pickled vegetables. And I want to try to make fermented vegetables as similar in taste as to something that you might buy from the grocery store. So that's just pickled. And so this way, your family will find the taste familiar. I find sometimes that whey can impart almost a little bit of a milky flavor to the fermented vegetables. And so that's why I would rather just go with 2 tablespoons of salt. Now, some people say, oh my goodness, that's going to be so salty. It's really more of the brine that'll have the salty flavor than the actual fermented vegetable. And the good news is, after you make these once, you can save some of the liquid from your original batch of fermented vegetables, whether they're carrots or slaw like this or something, or sauerkraut, whatever the case may be. And you can use a 1/4 cup of that liquid to start the next batch of fermented vegetables. And then all you'll want to do is add 1/4 cup of the fermenting liquid from the previous batch and 1 tablespoon of salt. And that fermented liquid will help kickstart the fermentation process. And the good news is that you still want to add that 1 tablespoon of salt, coarse sea salt if that's what you're using, or a half a teaspoon, or tablespoon, excuse me, or a half a tablespoon if you're using the fine ground sea salt. And the reason is the salt does help not only with the flavor, but with the crispiness. Now, sometimes when you're just fermenting vegetables, like if you're doing cut carrots and pickles and so on and so forth, you also want to have some tannins, and that can come in the form of putting a grape leaf on top, a fresh grape leaf, or you can use black tea leaves. That also works very well for keeping the crispiness. Now in this case, since we're making a slaw, that's not so much of a concern. Just like it is when you make sauerkraut. It's not so much of a concern that you maintain a crispy pickle or like a crispy carrot, something like that. So in this case, the salt does help with the flavor and the fermentation process, but also helps with keeping some nice texture to the final product, because fermented vegetables can sometimes be a little on the mushy side. And even with a slaw or a sauerkraut, you want some crispiness. And I find by reducing the salt to a tablespoon, and if you're using the coarse sea salt, and using the whey, it just doesn't bring the same flavor and the same crispiness and nice texture, nice mouthfeel as it does when you use the 2 tablespoons of salt. So that's just in my humble opinion. Now the next thing, all I'm going to do is just pound this to start releasing some of the juices from the carrot and the ginger. And if you don't have a pounder like this, don't worry. For years I just used like a potato masher or a meat pounder. Anything like that will work. It's just a matter of just getting something that you can pound this down on, and you'll start seeing the juices being released. And if you don't have any of the tools that I mentioned, like the pounder or a potato masher, not to worry. You can get into this bowl with clean hands and just start squeezing, not unlike probably many of our ancestors did. Well, after pounding this for about a minute or so, you'll see all the juices that were released from the carrots, and some from that little bit of ginger as well. Now you want to get a quart-sized jar, and you want to start putting in the carrots, and we're going to press them down as tight as we can. Well, I think I got everything in there, and now I'm just going to press it down with this little press here, this little pounder. We might have to remove a little bit of the liquid. This is kind of one of those things that when you make this at home, you kind of got to eyeball it a little, and you'll see, you'll start to realize exactly how much you need to put into your jar so that your liquid won't be overflowing. But can you believe this? I have not added any water. This is all the liquid that is released from the carrots. I always keep a little filtered water on the side in case I don't get enough liquid, but boy, this was very, very bountiful. Now, when you ferment any kind of vegetable, and in this case a ginger carrot slaw, you have to make sure that all of the vegetables are weighted down under the liquid, and this helps with the fermentation process and also to prevent spoilage. Now, you have a couple of options to do that. I've been doing this for fermenting vegetables for many, many years, and I always would just use a little glass 4-ounce jelly jar. And this is a little full, this jar, to use this, because whenever you naturally ferment vegetables, and in this case the ginger carrot slaw, you have to make sure all of the vegetables are weighted down and kept underneath the liquid, the brine liquid that we've made, the water and the sea salt. And the reason is that weighting them down and keeping them all submerged under the liquid helps with the fermentation process and at the same time prevents spoilage. I've been making fermented vegetables for years, going all the ways back to when my son was a little boy, and he's a grown man now. And I didn't know any of the things. I don't even know if things like this were available, these glass weights and these pickle pipes and things like this. And so in case you don't have all of these sort of accessories, I'm going to show you that what I did for years before I knew any of this was available. What I would do was just take a 4-ounce little glass jelly jar, and I would just drop it down right on top. And this would be heavy enough. Sometimes I'd even add some water in here if necessary. Sometimes just by pushing it down, the liquid that's been released from the vegetables would come over the edge and fill up into this jelly jar. So that would work well too. But I would put this in, press it down, make sure all the vegetables were submerged. Then I would take my canning lid and I would put it down, because often even though I would press this down quite firmly, it was still right at the lip or just slightly above the lip of the quart-sized jar. So then putting this canning lid on would give it a good little firm push, and everything would stay submerged. And then I would just put my ring on, and then I would just set it aside for a few days, and I would start to see the bubbles coming up. And I would just release the band, which I found easier to do. Certainly you can use one of these plastic lids instead and just put your jelly jar in and then put one of these plastic lids. But I always found it easier. When I would use these, sometimes they would stick. It was difficult to get uncapped. Sometimes maybe some of the fermentation liquid would get under, maybe it was a little sticky. It was a little hard. And when I would finally be able to loosen it, it would sometimes pop a little from the fermentation, from the gases, and it would frighten me. So I think I've shared that with you in the past. So what I liked to do was put in my jelly jar, then take my canning lid, put that on, and then put the ring on. And what I would find was when I would start to see the day or two of the bubbling where I knew I needed to release some gases, I would just loosen this, and sometimes that was enough. I would hear whoosh, like that. And if I didn't hear anything, then I would just take a can opener and loosen this, let out some of the gases, and then tighten, put everything back together and tighten it. Now, that's not a perfect system because, yes, technically you are letting in some oxygen, and that's, I guess, the whole point of the pickle pipe. It lets out the gases, but keeps the oxygen from coming in. And oxygen, the reason why we want to keep the oxygen out is to prevent spoilage. But with my little old-fashioned way of just using the little jelly jar on top, everything stayed submerged, and so I don't think the little bit of oxygen that might have gotten in when I was using this old-fashioned system of the canning lid and the canning ring and releasing the gases, I never got any spoilage. So I think this little old-fashioned way will work fine for you if these are the supplies you have on hand at home. And I'll be sure to put a link below to where I got all these fancy supplies. It's just Amazon if you're interested in using these kinds of things. So what I'm going to do is take this glass weight and just drop it right in there, plop. And then I'm just going to take this, just press it down ever so gently. And then I'm going to put this pickle pipe on top. And then I'm going to take my canning ring and secure that pickle pipe in place. And now I'm just going to set this aside for 2 to 3 days. And you'll notice you'll start to see, even sometimes after the first day, you'll start to see little bubbles starting to come up, definitely after the second or third day. And at that point, just open it up, taste it, and see if it's, use a clean spoon. And don't put the spoon back in for a second taste, but just open it, take a taste with a spoon, a clean spoon, and see if you like it. If it's to your liking, perfect. You'll take off all this apparatus and you'll put on a storage lid and you'll put it in your refrigerator. And then you can serve it up whenever you want. Now, if after 2 or 3 days you feel, it's still a little, salty tasting or doesn't have enough of a tang to it or whatnot, leave it for another day or 2. A lot of this depends on what season you're doing this during and what the temperature is in your kitchen. In the winter, if you're trying to ferment winter vegetables and it's very cold in your kitchen, it may take 5 days, maybe even a week, maybe 7 days. If it's in the summer and it's very warm in your kitchen, 2 to 3 days is probably going to be sufficient. But you'll be able to tell because you'll start seeing a lot of the bubbling, and you'll start, after 2 or 3 days, give it a taste, see how you like it. Especially if you're doing this with sauerkraut, you may not want it. It really depends how you like it. Do you like it when the cabbage is very soft, or do you like it with a little bit of crunch? So this is one of those things that's really very flexible and has a lot to do with personal taste. And as long as you make sure that everything stays submerged, the fermentation process will continue and you shouldn't get any spoilage. If there isn't enough liquid in there and the vegetables were exposed to the air, then you would be more inclined to get spoilage, and that's something that you would want to be careful of and watch. But hopefully there shouldn't be much evaporation with everything sealed like this. And I do think that 2 to 3 days, especially this time of year as we're warming up, I think this is going to be perfect. And what I'll do is, after a few days, I'll make another video so that you can see the progress. And this will help you at home determine if you're on the right path. If you'd like to learn more about traditional cooking to make nutrient-dense foods, be sure to subscribe to my channel. And then click on this video over here, where now that you know how to make fermented vegetables, I'll show you how to make a foolproof sourdough starter. And I'll see you over there in my Texas Hill Country kitchen. Love and God bless.